today's bike story, you're going to need a little background information. A long time ago when GT was on top of the mountain bike world, they had a sub-brand called Mount Shasta. And this was their discount brand. It was very similar to their mainline GT mountain bikes, but it was just a less expensive offering. So this guy comes into the shop and asks for a 26-inch tube. And the guy behind the counter asks him, "What kind of valve do you need? Presta or Schrader?" "Presta or Schrader?" "Shasta. The whole bike's Shasta." There are a lot of predictions about the end of Western civilization as we know it. The banking system might collapse, the environment could crumble all around us. There was either a rapture or there's supposed to be one. There are several impending alien attacks. If that happens, by the way, I hope it's one of those sexy aliens like in Species, or the fun ones like in Mars Attacks. The Mayan calendar is ending, and Glenn Beck is going to hunt you down and shoot you if you don't buy gold from him. Any of these predictions lead to Master Blaster imposing an embargo to take control of Bartertown from Tina Turner. Clearly, our culture and infrastructure is heavily dependent on the automobile. We know that any resource on Earth is finite. We have pictures from space. We know that there's no tube leading to Earth from somewhere else in the galaxy supplying us with resources. Oil, being a resource, is also finite. We now have this concept called peak oil. I'll just hit on some of the highlights because there's a lot of information on the internets about peak oil and it's more than you could ever possibly absorb, so I'm not going to rehash it here. Most of the future scenarios regarding peak oil are pretty grim and depressing, but the message I want to deliver today is they don't have to be. The idea is that once we burn up about half of the oil on Earth, the rest is going to be more difficult to get. It doesn't mean we ran out, but it does mean that it's going to get a lot more expensive and continue to get even more expensive. The idea started when M. King Hubbard predicted in the 1950s that U.S. oil production would peak around 1970. Turns out he was right. He also predicted that world oil production would peak in the late 1990s. He was off by a little bit, but consensus is building that he wasn't off by that much. We're probably peaking right now. In the 90s, oil companies refused to acknowledge that peak oil was even real. But if you looked at their stock prospectuses, you could see this thing called RRR, Reserve Replenishment Rate. That means how much oil did they pump out of the ground compared to how much oil did they find. If you pump out more, then your replenishment rate is less than 100%. But if you find more, then it's greater than 100%. Now they admit that peak oil is real, but claim it's years away. Well, even if it is, we the people of Earth are still using oil faster and faster, so that peak oil is accelerating sooner and sooner. Now, if you read predictions about how peak oil will change our lives, it's scarier than the rat helmet in 1984. Food will be scarce because tractors run on diesel and fertilizer is made from fossil fuels. It will be too expensive to truck food to the supermarkets or for you to drive to the supermarkets to get the food that isn't being trucked there. Unemployment will be 102%. Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. And some of these horrible things will happen if, and only if, we're cut off from our oil supply abruptly. On the other hand, if we can wean ourselves off of the oil tit, we can maintain a civilization under the rule of law without the apocalypse. A huge part of this transition will be bicycles. Think about this. If the only consequence of peak oil was that you could not get gas for your car, how would you get to work, school, or dinner? If you live in the burbs, there probably isn't much public transportation, and things are too spread out to walk everywhere. A bike would extend your range tremendously. You probably have a bike in the garage, but does it work? If it does, do you have the right gear to use it? Do you have the right clothes? Do you have lights? Do you have a bag or a basket on the bike to carry groceries? Do you have the tools and spare parts to keep the wheels turning? If you said no to any of these questions, you could be driving us all towards Thunderdome. Fortunately, gas prices are slowly creeping up and people are starting to rethink the hour-plus car commutes. If you relocate closer to work and shopping, cycling is a more reasonable option. Then if gas goes up to $9 a gallon next year, you have options. Keep in mind, I don't want to say the sky is falling, but ignoring a problem will not make it go away. If you prepare for this future and it doesn't come, you might be out a few bucks for some new bike gear. but you probably rode your bike a few more times than you would otherwise. If it does come, then you're prepared. If enough of us are pedaling and doing a few other common sense things to prepare, peak oil might pass into history without anyone ever noticing. Kind of like when Whitney Houston has a concert.
Thank you for watching Dan's Bike Show.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.